Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the crowded booth. My name is Bryce Koon, alongside Palmer Thombs, which means we're talking Georgia Bulldogs, which I guess Georgia Tech fans will go on to go ahead and click off this one, but you saw the thumbnail, so you should have known what was coming. But Palmer, we were just chatting it up for a solid 30 minutes before we finally hit that record button. We got all the UNC basketball talk out. We got all the ACC tier list out, and we're ready to talk some Georgia football where transfer portal season for a lot of fans has been kind to them. Others, there was a sought after transfer that did not decide to make Athens his next home. Let's talk about this transfer portal as we kind of lean into it. We're going to talk offense, defense, and maybe one of your sleepers. But overall, in this class, how do you feel like they addressed some of the needs that they had coming into the offseason?
Yeah, you look at the class, 7 transfers, 5 on offense, 2 on defense. I think that they did a good job addressing needs. I think that there probably still are some needs that could be further addressed, and that's what you've got the spring transfer portal period for. I think defensive line is probably one that everyone had circled for Georgia, and they did go out and get a defensive lineman in South Carolina transfer, Xavier McLeod. It's a kid that they highly pursued out of high school, ended up second place for him. He spends just a couple months in Columbia and ultimately steps away from that team and is going to be joining the Bulldogs in Athens here this spring. And so, that's one. I think the other need that you would look at for Georgia, wide receiver. It's always going to be a need because when you become a team that becomes dependent on the transfer portal at a specific position, or in the case of Florida State and Ole Miss as across the entire team, Georgia has become a team that hits in the transfer portal at wide receiver. They took 2 last year in Ra Thomas from Mississippi State and Dominic Lovett from Missouri. Over the years prior to that, I mean, you go back to 2018, they added D-Rob. 2019, they added Lawrence Cager. 2020, they ended up taking a tight end. 2021, that was the year that they did not take any transfers. 2021 they did, 2022 they didn't. Anyway, they hit with 3 wide receivers there. You add a running back in Trevor Etienne. So this class, they go out and they addressed 2, maybe even 3 major needs in wide receiver, defensive line, and defensive back help. And then you add a couple of supplementary pieces as well that have the potential to step in and help big time right away because of needs at those positions that maybe weren't as pressing. But when you've got players out there of the caliber that Georgia was capable of adding, you go get those guys.
Yeah, it feels like more maybe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, a fine tuning. It's just a couple tweaks here and there. It's adding around the edges, and that's where Georgia is with this roster. Now, that doesn't mean these guys cannot be impact players, and I'm going to ask you for a guy that you think is going to pop here later on to the show. But let's start here with the defensive side of the football. I know you mentioned one of them there, in obviously Xavier McLeod, 6'5", around 285, 290. A guy for me, when I just looked at Georgia's roster from afar this year, obviously, I mean, Palmer, it's no secret, they kind of missed a big disruptive presence in the middle as they had the past couple of years. Now,
No
that doesn't
kind of
mean that.
about that.
Yeah, that doesn't mean that Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis are necessarily replaceable in terms of who they are. Those guys were monsters. Devontae Wyatt as well. How does McLeod help with that? And then also get your thoughts on the back end when they added Jake Pope. Is there a path to playing time? Is this a depth pickup? Your thoughts on those 2 guys?
Yeah, I mean, with Xavier McLeod and the defensive line, you're absolutely right there that they were missing that marquee piece in the middle. And they bring back a couple of the guys. You look at Georgia's team in 2023 and the 3 interior presences that they really relied on, the veterans and that they were counting on to be those disruptive forces, were Zion Logue, Nazir Stackhouse, and Warren Brinson. 2 of those 3 are going to be back. Logue is off to the NFL, but Stackhouse and Brinson are back. So that probably eased the concerns a little bit for Georgia. You didn't necessarily have to address the defensive line as hard if 2 of those guys or 3 of those guys end up leaving. Maybe you see another defensive lineman that Georgia had ended up taking. And again, if there's one that's out there in the spring that absolutely can play for Georgia and can fill a need there, they'll go get them. just won't be somebody from the SEC because of the interconference transfer rule. But Xavier McLeod, I mean, a top 200 player coming out of high school, the number 3 player in the state of South Carolina, somebody that, like I said, Georgia recruited, finished second place to the Gamecocks on. It just wasn't a fit for him in Columbia. And I think that, he's able to hit the reset button and see if things can work, for him in Athens, working with Trey Scott, somebody that he developed a great relationship with during that recruiting process. And look, because they have Stackhouse and Brinson coming back, and they've also got Kristen Miller and Jordan Hall, 2 very highly touted players coming out of high school that are relatively young. I mean, Hall is in his 2nd season with the program, going into his true sophomore year. Miller is going into a redshirt sophomore year, took a redshirt year that first year and has, made an impact as a redshirt freshman this past year. Those 2 guys are going to be counted on as well. And I think that, I know we're talking transfer portal, but as you look at Georgia and the potential of this team, those 2 guys are probably their impact and their ability to make, strides could have the biggest, boom or bust potential for Georgia, in terms of determining how this team does. All that being said, Xavier McLeod is not going to be relied on, but and I think that's probably good for him coming into a system like this. Again, he's young. I mean, he's just a 2nd-year player, will be a redshirt freshman this fall. So, to be able to sit back and learn from some guys that have played SEC football before, that'll be good for him. That being said, he also has the potential to make an impact because he does have that talent. Moving back in the defense to secondary, Jake Pope from Alabama, somebody that I do think that there is potential that he can play. I definitely see this as a depth piece, but I think that because of the lack at safety, lack of depth there, Jake Pope can play. You look at Georgia and they're losing Javon Bullard on the back end. You've got Malachi Starks returning, but he's only got 1 season of eligibility left. Will only be in Athens for 1 more year. That he is, going to go pro after 3 years. I would be shocked if he didn't. So, you're only counting on seeing Malachi Starks back there for 1 more year. Who's going to play beside him? That's a big question. Is it going to be Dan Jackson, the walk-on that has, made his name known over the last few years? Is it going to be David Daniel Sisavon? Is it going to be Ja'Cory Thomas? Those guys have been around, but they really haven't made a move. And so, this is the offseason for those guys to make moves. And I think that you're also looking at other guys, in that secondary. They add KJ Bolden, the number 1 safety in the country from this past signing class. That's somebody that you're looking at. But I think with Jake Pope, the experience that he brings to the table, having spent 2 years in a Nick Saban, Kirby Smart system, he knows what he's supposed to do, or at least, he understands, that kind of defense, that style of defense. And so I think that at worst, you're adding somebody that is going to be an impact player for you on special teams. That's what he was for Alabama. And at best, you've added somebody that has experience and understands what to do and can step in and be a contributor in the secondary.
Yeah, and obviously you mentioned those 2 guys, Pope, a guy that Georgia pursued at the high school level. And I joke about this all the time. We just talked with our Go 24/7 podcast with LSU. It's almost beneficial, like maybe more, to finish second with the amount of the rate that these guys transfer out. Like if you finish second in the high school race, you're probably the leader as soon as they want to leave, depending on your coaching situation. So they get Jake Pope and Xavier McLeod. Now, Palmer, on the offensive side of things, they made some more additions. They went back to the well, like you mentioned, with that receiver position, and it has some Georgia fans excited about the potential and some of those new toys, including running back, that Carson Beck's going to be able to play with. Kind of give us the rundown on some of those guys. And obviously ETN is a guy that, Georgia fans are familiar with and probably going to be glad to see him in the red and black.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll start with wide receiver because that's where the bulk of the group is, with Kobe Young, London Humphreys, and Michael Jackson III, all 3 coming from Power 5 schools, Miami, Vanderbilt, and USC. Kobe Young is the one that excites me the most because, and I guess I'll save my explanation there because I know what this next segment is going to be about. But, I think that with those three that you're adding, a couple of different things. You add some speed, you add some size, you add some playmaking ability and proven playmaking ability. I mean, London Humphreys was just a freshman this past year at Vanderbilt, but was one of the SEC's best freshmen. Georgia saw that firsthand as he scored on them on that opening drive. In Georgia's woes of first possession touchdowns that they were giving up, London Humphreys was one of those that they did give up. Michael Jackson, somebody out at USC. Those two kind of, to me, bring the same thing to the table. Humphreys has more eligibility left. I mean, he's guaranteed to be, playing college football, not just in 2024, but in 2025 as well. Whereas Jackson and Young are older guys that, probably won't be playing college ball in, beyond 2024. You're probably looking at a 1-year stop for them. That being said, you look at Georgia's receiver room and what they bring back. I don't know that I would project any of these guys in that first group of receivers as starters. I probably look more at Thomas, Dominic Lovett, again, two guys that came from the transfer portal this time last year, and Dylan Bell. Those three guys. Anthony Evans would be another one that you would, that there's a lot of excitement about. Those guys can make a impact. But, as you look at what Georgia's losing in that wide receiver room, I think that they do a really good job in replacing those guys. Ladd McConkey, a guy that can play on the outside, play on the inside. You probably have that in both Humphreys and Jackson. And then a bigger, maybe more possession receiver. I don't know that that's the best term to use, to describe Marcus, because Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint, because he's got some downfield playmaking ability too, but certainly a bigger physical presence. Kobe Young brings that to the table. So that's your receivers. I'll shift to tight end now with the latest addition to Georgia's transfer class. Ben Urasek, somebody that, look, he's got big shoes to fill. I mean, Georgia is replacing, probably the GOAT of college tight ends in Brock Bowers. And so, is Urasek going to be that guy? Is he going to be Brock Bowers 2.0? No, I don't think that he will be. If he is, Georgia fans will, absolutely love that kid. But I think that he's got, brings a lot of the same skills to the table, the same traits. He's 6'4", and has that similar weight to him, similar build. There's not many tight ends that you can hand the ball off to and, count on them to take it 50 yards. Urasek did that. And now, granted, I mean, it wasn't against the SEC. It was out in the Pac-12, but I think that, you're adding somebody that brings similar skills to the table. And obviously, you're really excited about Lawson Lucky and Pierce Spurlin, the two, kids that were true freshmen this past year. Lucky, really came on strong in the spring and, maybe had a little bit of a derailing injury there during fall camp. But, that's somebody that George is excited about, at that tight end spot. Obviously, Oscar Delp comes back as well, and you add to, from the signing class. But, when you, again, like I said earlier, tight end probably wasn't a need of Georgia's, but it was one where when you can add a player of this caliber, you go do that. And so that's what it was at tight end, and that's what it was at running back too. Running back probably was a little bit more of a need because you've got Branson Robinson dealing with an injury that probably will have him sidelined into the season, after suffering a ruptured patella tendon last fall camp. You're looking at that running back room and you lose two guys in Kendall Milton and Dejan Edwards. You are counting on Branson to probably be out. And so you're looking at, well, what do we have? You've got Andrew Paul and you've got Roderick Robinson, two guys that were playing their first seasons this past year and didn't get a ton of experience playing behind, again, Milton and Edwards. So when you can go add somebody that has that SEC experience like Trevor Etienne does, you absolutely do it. I mean, somebody that has proven his game at the college level. Again, it's funny to watch. You've seen was the case with London Humphreys, was the case with Dominic Lovett and Thomas. All these guys that Georgia played against and guys that made plays against Georgia, they're willing to go get them. They know if you can make plays on this Georgia defense, you can make plays against any team. So Trevor Etienne, somebody that, obviously Georgia fans are, and football fans are familiar with that name, given his brother's success. That's another one. Georgia was involved in that recruitment.
Yeah.
And ultimately he heads to Florida. Now he's going to be suiting up for the Bulldogs this fall. So to me, that's probably the one that people are most excited about, given the name value. But I lean, and I showed my hand there a little bit. I lean another direction there.
Yeah. Well, let's before we get there, I do want to give credit. We were talking about this in our latest one of our latest episodes, SEC tier rankings. Just talking about Vanderbilt. We respect Vanderbilt. We love Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt has some really good people on staff that can decipher through the recruiting rankings and find talent. Problem's gonna be able to keep it. And so shout out to them for finding London Humphreys and being that guy. All right, you did show your hand a little bit. Who makes the biggest impact and why? And I think we all know, if you've been paying attention, where you're leaning with this one.
Well, okay. So biggest impact, I think, is probably going to be ETN because of the opportunity. Given that he's probably going to be running back one, but the one that has me most excited would be Kobe Young. And I think that is because of the size that he brings to the table. It's something that Georgia just hasn't had in a couple of seasons. I mean, you really have to find somebody that is a true go up and get it jump ball type receiver. At 6'5" for Kobe Young. He is listed a little bit smaller than that on Georgia's roster. Miami listed him at 6'5". Georgia, I think, has him at 6'3". So if we want to find the middle ground there, 6'4".
Yeah.
You just don't have guys like that come around all that often at that position. In fact, the last one that I think was 6'5" for Georgia also came from Miami, and it was Lawrence Cager. And so to me, I think it's that kind of same fit. You've got some bigger physical receivers. Dylan Bell is a guy that can, go up and get it. Tyler Williams is somebody that Georgia recruited and was excited about. And he's, still young in that development. I think that having a guy like Kobe Young around could be big for Tyler because he's able to see somebody that has that same kind of build and same kind of style to his game, able to go out and watch them, execute. A.D. Mitchell, was a 6'4" guy, and we saw how he was able to go up and get it. That's the kind of impact that I think Kobe Young can have. Again, replacing Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint and Lad McConkey, he certainly fits that, Marcus role a little bit more, where he's the bigger physical guy, able to make plays and go up and get balls. So that's the one that excites me the most because I think he brings something to the table that Georgia maybe didn't have on its roster. You've got guys like London Humphreys and Michael Jackson. To me, they're all, those two are pretty comparable to an Anthony Evans. And Arian Smith kind of brings that same speed element to the table. So they've got that. They've got good tight ends and playmaking ability at that position. They've got safety depth. They've got defensive linemen. They've got good running backs, maybe not proven running backs. And so that's where I think ETN probably makes the biggest impact because there's need at that position. But I think that Kobe Young might have the biggest potential to make a huge, huge impact for Georgia.
You heard it right there. Palmer Thombs talking Georgia football. Palmer, before we get you out of here, man, I know we always let you do this, and that's okay, even though I guess we're technically competitors, but it doesn't really matter. Tell people where they can find your content. I know it's this time of the year, man. It's some good content we're all putting out, good quality stuff. But where can they find your stuff and what you do?
Yeah, dogshq.com. Like you said, the month of February is an interesting one around this industry. Times it's slowed down football season. You're far enough removed from football season that you can't really recap the previous one, but you're also far enough away from spring practice that you don't want to dive into that a little bit too much. But we'll certainly be getting into that over the next few weeks. And it's an exciting time to be covering Georgia. Always is. Bulldogs bring in the #1 ranked recruiting class. They've got some really exciting young pieces that are coming in, and obviously the transfer portal talent that we talked about. So be sure to head on over to Dogs HQ and check out the work of myself and the crew that we've got.
It's going to be a lot of fun. Make sure to go over there and check out what Palmer Thombs has going on. We appreciate Palmer joining the show. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel if you like it, and we appreciate you for listening, whether it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or watching right here on YouTube. We'll catch you next time here on the Crowded